So the first question will then be about your family's history in the genocide. Do you know which towns your parents are from?
Yeah, I'm Kilisi from both sides. So my mother's ancestors and my father's ancestors are all from Kilis. Um, my my grandfather from my mother's side was born in Aleppo, but my grandfather from my father's side was born in Kilis, and he was 6 years old when the genocide was taking place. So he witnessed all the torturing and everything. So and then he grew up in Aleppo, and you know continued his life like every other Syrian Armenian.
So your grandfather from your father's side was 6 years old during the genocide?
Yes.
Do you remember hearing stories from him about what your family or others in that village had gone through?
Actually, I didn't see him because when I was no, before my father and my mother got married, he passed away, I think, 6 years before my family's marriage. So none of my family members except for my dad knows him. So
did you hear stories from your father?
Yes, stories about, like, my father used to say that his father always, even though he was 6 years old when he witnessed the genocide, but he remembers every single detail and how the Turks were torturing Armenians, were like guessing whether or not a pregnant woman was bearing was bearing a child or a girl. So and then torturing her and performing a surgery to see whether or not it's a boy or girl. So without anesthesia. So many stories, and they used to provide food and provide bread as if they are helping Armenians, but then whoever took the bread, they killed him, and stuff like this. So all the scenes that we've seen in Myrik, the film Myrik, it's really true.
And was your grandfather or your father's grandfather?
No, my grandfather.
Was your grandfather forced on any deportation route out of Kilis?
Do you mean he was forced?
Were they forced to walk to Deir Zor, or were they forced on any deportation route?
No, actually, Kilis is very close to Aleppo, so they didn't have to walk to Deir Zor and come back. And I don't think so. No, they just migrated to Aleppo, and Aleppo was a place where even before genocide, Armenians used to come and go for trade issues, and I think they came by vehicles, something like a car. Car was not there, but maybe by riding an animal. So I don't know, but they didn't walk. At least I don't know those stories.
Okay. And so, how old was your grandfather when he arrived in Aleppo? Do you know?
He was 6 years old.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He was born in 1909.
Okay. Yeah. And they left when the genocide started. They left for Aleppo.
Yeah.
And do you know what it was like for him growing up in Aleppo? Did your father tell you stories about his life?
Yeah, actually, when he arrived to Aleppo, he was at the age of going to school for the first grade of school. So he started to study there because his uncle was already a famous Armenian what was the word? Anthropologist? No.
What?
Like humanitarian person.
Anthropologist.
Yeah. Anthropologist. Mm-hmm. Am I right? Okay. Yeah. So his uncle was a famous Armenian anthropologist who used to raise funds, and even his name was mentioned in a floor in my school. So he sponsored his their living and for their living and for his studies till 6th grade. So he went to school for 6 years, and then he started to work. And since it was in Aleppo, in Syria in general, was the French occupation period, so he went and studied and learned. Sorry, no, not French. Like, he wasn't craftsman, but something like to work in shops. Or, I don't know.
Like a trade.
Not trade. He became an engineer afterwards. So how should I say the sentence? He worked with French people.
Okay.
With French engineers or something like.
Like he was like as an apprentice.
Arhestavor. What is Arhestavor?
I don't know, like apprentice.
No, maybe craftsman.
Okay.
So after leaving school, after 6th grade, so he started to work with French people, with French engineers, and he learned that job and had high dreams to become an engineer. But since he was an orphan, let's say, because his father was died in genocide, so he couldn't continue his studies. Then by his own by self-study, he learned French language, and then he studied in a French college or university, I don't know, at that time, through the French embassy in Syria, and he became an engineer, and he worked after that for his whole life, and a lot of Syrian engineers, or not engineers but craftsmen who are Hestavor in electrics were trained in his shop,
and just going back a little bit to when he went to school, it was not an Armenian school, was it?
Yeah, it was an Armenian school, because back then, since it was a French occupation, so Arabic language was not a formal language, so there were Armenian schools, and Armenians were more like gathered in one place in one or two regions. So they were just like living in Armenia, and so they created their own Armenia outside of Armenian highlands. So and then the school was in Armenian, and the subjects were in Armenian. And as far as I know, the books, if that matters, the books were sent from Cyprus or something else. Yeah.
Wow. So your grandfather then was able to become an engineer.
Yeah, something like, he was a craftsman, but with degree.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then your father was also born in Aleppo?
Yes, my father was born in Aleppo, and he's also an electric and electronic engineer, and he was trained in his father's store since 8 years old, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, and then he studied in Aleppo University in Arabic language, so the generation changed, and so this was a soft transition to Arabic language.
So your grandfather studied in the Armenian language?
No,
French,
his degree was in French. So he studied in French language, the degree, the electrics, but first 6 years the school was in Armenian.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then during your father's time, his whole curriculum was in Arabic?
Yes, because the country changed, the situation, political situation changed in Syria in 1946. It got the independence from French government. So, and after that, they all the subjects or the curriculum became in Arabic language. We just had since then till now, even in Armenian schools, we have all the curriculum in Arabic language. The subjects are taught in Arabic language. Just we have separate classes or separate subject, which is Armenian language, and also the religion is taught in an Armenian language.
And has it changed when you went to school? Were there any differences between when your father was in school?
Yeah, it was from my father's age.
And then, but what about differences between your father's education and yours?
It's the same.
Okay.
From the perspective of language, teaching language, it's the same.
And what about teaching Armenian history and Armenian language and culture? Is that allowed?
Yes, it was allowed. So actually, there is a difference between my age and my sister's age. So my sister, which is elder than me, 5 years elder than me. So she was taught Armenian history, a separate subject which is taught in Armenian language. It's Armenian history in 5th and 6th grade of school. But in my period, when I was 5th year, they didn't allow us to take that subject, to take that course. It was removed from our curriculum.
What year was that?
Maybe the situation between Syria and Turkey, political relationships became better. So.
What year was it? How old were you?
Right now?
No, what year was it when?
Was it?
When you were in 5th grade or 6th grade?
2006. Yeah, 2006. So.
Wow.
I guess the relations between Syria and Turkey were better. More than ever, so some changes had to take place.
And so your father grew up in Aleppo and your mother also grew up in
Yes.
Aleppo? And what jobs did they both have in Aleppo?
So my father is an engineer, electric engineer, and my mother is studied economics and administration, business and administration. She has it's not master's degree, but it's at that time there was a degree lower than master's, but it's again a graduate study. So she holds that degree as well, and she taught actually in the university. So not in the university, in institutes of business and administration. So those are the degrees that they hold.
And do you know when they were growing up in Aleppo, did they go to Armenian schools?
Yes, both of them. My father from 1st grade till graduation, but my mother till 6th grade. But beginning from 7th grade till graduation, she went to American college, which taught the curriculum is the same. It's taught in Arabic, but they put more attention on English language, and literature, language and literature.
And then you and your sister were also both born in Aleppo.
Yes.
In what part?
In Aleppo.
No, like
in which? No, it's not Armenian province. Neighborhood. It is in Tilal. It's called Al Tilal. It is next to Aziziye, if you know. It's like Christian neighborhood, or more like it's not Armenian, but more likely to be a Christian neighborhood.
And so were your neighbors? Did you have Armenian neighbors?
Yeah, maybe 2 or 3 neighbors.
But the majority
were Christians. Arabic speaking. They're not Arabs, but they speak Arabic. So, but they are Christians.
And did they go to special schools as well?
Yes, yeah. There were schools special for Christians, Christian Arabs, not Armenians. So they went to those schools.
And which school did you go to?
To Armenian school, to AGBU Lazar Najarian.
And did you speak Armenian in your home?
Yes, of course.
And in school, was that the main place to be with Armenians, or did you do activities outside of school?
Actually, the whole our life was in Armenian community. So the school, the church, everything and everywhere. Just I play on the piano. And I learned playing on the piano in a governmental conservatory, and this was the only place where I practiced my Arabic language before going to university. Other than that, my whole life was in Armenian community, wherever I go.
So what is a typical week like? You go to Armenian school during the day, and then
and then I go to Armenian group dancing, and then maybe to play on the trumpet in Armenian fanfare, or which is, I don't know, is it called fanfare in English? Brass section, brass group. And then playing basketball in an Armenian group team. That was my week, just. And on Sunday maybe we used to go to the church, and after that to my grandparents' house. So it was Armenian everywhere.
And did you have Muslim friends or Christian Arab friends?
Yes, I had Muslim and non-Armenian Christian friends. The majority of them are. I had the majority of them after graduating from school, or after going to the university, because the university is governmental and it's public university, and there are students from all over Aleppo, and even from the villages nearby Aleppo, and from different cities where there is no medical school there. So it was a great experience to have friends from different communities and different backgrounds and religion.
Did you feel any differences between you and them, either good or bad?
In which
neutral?
Viewpoint?
Yeah, sure. Between you and between Armenians and others.
Yeah, between Armenians and others, differences, but from which viewpoints?
Whichever you want to talk about. Yeah, whatever comes to mind.
I always asked about us Armenians being discriminated against other communities, because they always used to say, "Why don't you want to make relations with us? Friendship or relationship, anything, any kind of relation." And I used my only answer was my only gun was to say that we have to conserve our nationality in Syria, because we didn't intend to leave Syria. So we wanted to live there forever. We weren't planning to go outside of Syria, but at the same time we wanted to stay Armenians, to conserve and to maintain the nationality. So I don't know if it's possible to get the point.
So how do you think that the Syrian Armenians throughout all of Syria, Aleppo, Damascus, Kesab, what do you think was the most powerful or the strongest way that they were able to preserve this Armenian identity?
Well,
and why do you think that was so important?
Well, I don't think that there is an important factor, because it's all about perspectives. In my opinion, there is no perfect way to preserve the identity unless you want to sacrifice the pleasure of being integrated in a community like Syria or the Syrian community or anywhere else. So it's all about balancing between sacrificing your integration or to preserve the identity. So I think us as Armenians, we prefer to preserve the identity more than being integrated. Whoever was having the dream to become a politician, especially in politics, in the field of politics, we all refused to take part in politics in Syria, because we used to say, okay, it's not our country, it's just Syria, we're Armenians, it's not our homeland. So we didn't want to integrate, even though we were half integrated. So going back to your question, I don't think there is a powerful way to preserve the identity. Any community is going to be dissolved in that region, in that country in which it's living, within 100 years or 200 years. There is no right way to do something, to do um, to preserve the identity.
But so the Syrian Armenians were 100 years or more they were there, and they weren't like dissolved into the
Yes.
the bigger community. They remained their ethnic minority and religious minority. And so, what do you think allowed them to do that?
Allowed them to do that. Okay. First of all, Syria is the first place where they migrated to after genocide. So they brought all the culture and everything. It's just like copying any page. If you copy the page, the first example is always good. The second example, if it's copied from the first example, not from the original example, it's not good anymore. So this is, I think, the most important factor that allowed us to preserve our identity. And also, it's very close to Turkey, current Turkey. Currently, it's Turkey, but it was Armenia. So it's very close to there. And also, what else? And also, people in Syria are not mono-ethnic. So they are used to deal with people, with other people, let's say, or with different people, because there are Kurds there, living there for 1,000 years or so, and there are different little ethnic groups, Christian groups, who all of them speak in Arabic, but they preserve their identity. They go to their special churches. So there is this multi-ethnicity. Even before Armenians came and migrated to Syria. So they put the welcome mat very easily.
And do you think that in any way the war or the displacement of the Syrian Armenians affected that preservation of the Armenian identity?
Well, yes, of course, that's very obvious, because first of all, the quantity and the number of Armenians is reduced drastically. It was maybe 80,000. There were 80,000 Armenians in all over Syria, 60,000 being in Aleppo, and now maybe there are only few thousand Armenians in whole Syria. So the number affects also. I don't know. Schools are still working. There is no school which closed its doors because of low amount of students. They all want to survive and continue the teaching, to teach Armenian, because each school has its own community, and so they have to preserve their schools. But I think the most important factor that affected on Syrian Armenian situation within Syria is their number, nothing else. There is no acute situations of discrimination against Armenians because of war, but just the number is reduced right now, and no one wants. And another important factor, which is related to the number, that majority of Armenians, at least in Armenia, don't want to return back to Syria, especially youth population.
So I guess I jumped around a little bit. Let's go back to the time in Syria. So you said that that you didn't feel like you were Syrian. You were just Armenians living in Syria, right?
Yes.
So you didn't go to the war or anything like that. But so, do you feel in any way that you're Syrian?
Actually, I wanted to answer on behalf of all Syrian Armenians, because I think it is a general opinion that we are just Armenians and we're not Syrians. But me, myself, I feel myself as a Syrian. I used to feel more when I was in Syria, because as I said, majority of my neighbors are not Armenians, and I used to speak Arabic language from age of 5 or 4. I don't know. So I didn't feel the difference between Armenians, or even I had Muslim friends, and in my family there's a Muslim person as well. So um, we don't have that problem. But if eventually at the end of the day we want to preserve the identity, but we feel ourselves as Syrians and Armenians. You know, there is this famous Armenian. I have to stop. There is this famous Armenian author, Shahan Shahnur, who fled, who fled Turkey, who fled Istanbul, I think, to French, and he during genocide period, and he has one of his works, which is Nahancha Arantsiyeki. In that book, he mentions that every diaspora Armenian lives in dualism. So he's always two persons condensed in one person. So I think I lived that more than the stereotypical diaspora or Syrian Armenians, that they feel more Armenians than they are to be Syrians.
I guess that was really beautiful. I wanted to ask more about that, but I don't have any more questions on that. So
okay.
I was going to ask about the war, but do you have any other comments that you'd like to make about Armenian identity in Syria, or identity, within so many different, so much diversity, like, because you lived with Christian Arabs, and then there were other, Arab Muslims around, and then you were Christian Armenians, and so living among so much diversity, do you think that strengthened Armenian identity more, or diluted it?
Oh, that's a great question, because wherever there is diversity, there is the opportunity to become to take both, to take either way. So if you choose to strengthen your identity, you can strengthen more, because the differences are clearer between communities, and you preserve some traits of being Armenian more. So I remember some of our discussion topics, which is about food, which is typical for Armenians. So dolma, which is very traditional Armenian dish. We used to wonder about its origin. So whether it is Armenian or Turkish or Kurdish or Arabic, I don't know, because all the people living in Middle East cook the same dish, which is dolma. So, but when you witness the differences, Christian Arabs cook it in a way, and Armenians cook it in a different way. So you feel this difference, and you strengthen more in your traditions. Though you don't become close-minded, it's mind-opening. Diversity is always mind-opening, but at the same time you realize more about your traditions, and it's an opportunity to be more preservative.
I guess a lot of the cultural traditions that you maintained within the Armenian community was because of all the Armenians who lived there. So then the war started, and the community has, become many, many less people. But so from the beginning of the war, what was the reaction like for you and within the Armenian community? Even just before the war, when the protests were starting, what was it like?
So when the protests started, first of all, I would like to say that it's been 3 years that I'm outside of Syria, and within those 3 years, our mentalities as a whole community changed. So back then, in the period of protests, we didn't realize that there's something called protest and there is something called like, yeah, you can go outside and just demand your whatever you want to demand. So it wasn't like we weren't like um, seeing it, I would say. How should I say? We weren't.
You weren't part of it.
We weren't considering it as a protest. Like we said, oh, it's a problem that it's going to be solved, and our government is very strong, and it's going to finish all those processes and return, and life will going to be returned. So I don't think that Armenians were much involved in protests, but in 2012, after 1 year of the war, Aleppo started to have problems, and for example, in my neighborhood, the rebellions at that time, there were just rebellions, no terrorists. Rebellions reached to our house. Rebels. Yeah, sorry. Rebels reached to our house, and there was Garib. Fighting, yeah. There was a fighting between the Syrian Arab army, and the Free Army, which is a rebels army. So we lived that, and it was very horrible. And then it was within 3-4 days it was resolved, and we didn't think about leaving Syria at that time. We said, oh, even though we are witnessing this, it's going to be resolved. We were very confident, and we were very we are trusting very much in our government. So maybe that was a mistake. We should not take anything for granted. So that was the approach of Armenians to war. Till now, a lot of people ignore that there are very much problems, and I don't blame them, because some people didn't even flee Syria for any other place. And as long as you're not outside, as long as you're staying there, you don't see anything very clearly. Yeah. That's why I mentioned that within 3 years, since I left Syria, my mentality changed, because I was outside of it. So I could see the big picture and the whole elephant, I would say. Yeah.
So while you were within Syria, you think you were more optimistic that, you know, it was going to be okay, but now you're outside of Syria, you see how grave the conflict is?
I was more optimistic. We were more optimistic that everything is going to be okay, but the first time that we thought very seriously that it was when my sister went outside of Syria. She went to Turkey to work, and she started, and when she was in Syria, she was also optimistic that everything is going to, even though there are destroyed buildings and disastrous places, and you know what, it's going to be okay. When she went there, and after a while, maybe after a month, she started to beg us to leave Syria, because she started to feel she was insecure about us living in Syria. So at that time, I started to think, so what is this magical way that everyone leaves Syria, starts to think it in a different way? So and then our house was bombarded. Luckily, we weren't at home at that time. So because of that incident, we decided to migrate to Armenia. So that was the reason we left Syria.
So your house was bombed?
Yes. We're not sure, but it was from a region where rebels were dominating. So.
And just, it doesn't have to be on here if you don't want to, but in your opinion, what is the main point of the conflict? What is the main thing the rebels want, and what is the main thing the government wants?
Oh, from
It's
political.
kind of political, yeah. Never mind. I know the answer. I just wanted to hear an Armenian's point of view.
Yeah.
Wait, okay, we'll remove that from the video.
No, it's not a problem.
No, but I don't want to make these videos political.
Okay.
Because I know the Armenians side with the government, and so I just wanted to know. But I don't want to add that in here.
Okay, we can speak later.
Yeah. But do you have a good answer? Like, is it an answer
Yes.
that maybe like
which is maybe different.
Should it be on the video?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So, well, the last thing you said was, oh, you decided to leave. Because your house was bombed. You didn't know by who.
Yeah.
Back to the video.
Yeah.
In what year was your house bombed?
In 2015, and I guess the date is also important. It was 26th of April, just after 2 days from 24th of April, and it was the 100th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide Memorial. So at that time, and even now, we thought that it's just a coincidence that it took place in that time, but because our house, like from architectural point of view, our house is in second floor, and the whole building is four floors. So the most risky places are either the fourth floor or the first floor, because the bombs used to fall either on in the street or on the roof. So it wasn't so risky floor, but because of that incident, only our house was bombarded. So it was just like a targeted. I don't know. It was targeted, and the day after our house incident, there was another Armenian family who lived in the next street, which is also not an Armenian neighborhood, and their houses was also bombarded at that time in 27th of April. So we thought, and our neighbors said that, rebels are targeting Armenians because it's 100th anniversary. So we made fun, but I don't know if it's true or not. Yeah.
What did you do when your house was bombed? Did you go to a relative's house or family's
house? Yes. Luckily, we weren't at home because it was in around 3:30 afternoon. So it was Sunday. It was on Sundays, and everyone, like all Armenians, used to sleep at that time after having a good meal on Sunday. But how should I say? If it's fortunately or unfortunately, it was my grandfather's karasung. What is karasung? 40
days after his death.
Yeah, 40 days after his death, and we were in the church. So we were in the church at that time, but everything was finished. But I wanted to go home to study to prepare for my exams, because day after that incident, I had an histology exam. Till now, I remember, and again, luckily, I was invited in a concert in the conservatory because I was teaching piano classes, and I was a teacher of piano and solfege subjects in Armenian conservatory, and I was invited in a concert, so I had to attend it, and luckily I was there at that time, and my father and mother didn't go back at home because during that period there were it wasn't safe at that time, but we didn't think something happened to us exactly, but the whole neighborhood was not safe.
Was everyone in your building
Yeah.
who was there.
Our neighbors told us that it's better if you come back after 3 or 4 hours because it's not safe right now. So they were hearing sounds of bombs falling in maybe in next street which was very close to our building. So we didn't think, and even they heard sound of tunnels being exploded. Exploded. So they didn't return back because of that, and I didn't return back because of the concert. And then when I left the concert, my mom told me to go to our relative's house, and I wondered, and I said, okay, let's go and see what happened. Our all relatives were there, and no one was speaking a single word. So I wondered what happened. Then my mom, no, my relative started to cry, and I said, "What's happening? Like there is something strange. I can feel it." So she passed her phone, and because she had recorded our building from outside, so I saw it, and we said, "Hopefully, I wasn't there." So and we stayed there in our relative's house for 3 months till we gather our. So we till I give my exams to finish my the second year studies. In order not to lose any year. So we stayed there in our relative's house, and after finishing the semester, we came to Armenia.
And everybody who was in that building, who was there at the moment, did they die?
No, no one died, because our neighbor called my father that your door is open. If you want to close it, it's a good idea if you come to close it, even though it's not safe right now. And even they didn't know about the incident because they didn't want to leave their house. So whenever they reached to my mom and my father and one of our relatives, whenever they reached to our neighborhood, to the street, our neighbor from the building in front of us told that don't look very abruptly, you just look gradually to the building from outside because you're going to be shocked. And this is the way they was informed about it. So they went there and made sure that everything was, the important things were reachable. So they took it and go back to our relatives.
Did you lose a lot?
Well, the whole house was bombarded. The furniture was gone. The only thing that we sold before coming here was my piano, because I wanted to, because I knew if I was to just put it there in our house, someone from our neighbors or from displaced people who were living in our street, in our neighborhood, displaced from other neighborhoods. So one of them was going to steal it or just burn it in winter. So I thought of selling it because it's a better idea for a student to learn on it more than to serve it for others to just burn it and because we witnessed that. We witnessed furnitures being stole from other neighborhoods where rebels were dominating. So we knew the whole scenario which was going to take place.
So what was it like, living every day for 4 years?
Yeah.
In a war zone.
But since we haven't decided to go outside, so we were just struggling and saying that okay, if we leave then that is a that is a good thing for us. If we didn't leave, that's our destination. So
Our
destiny, that's our destiny. So that was the mentality that we were living in it through it. Um, uh, our neighborhood was not safe. Other Armenian neighborhoods like Suleimania that you mentioned, and Aziziye, and many other places were not so unsafe. So, but the rebels started to fight from our neighborhood, and even after that, there were a lot of incidents. I used to like in one day I saw one of the displaced people who were living in our neighborhood. There was a bomb fault in their house, and um, he was bringing his wife and his children just and seeking for help. And then I think one of his children died there, and his wife also died, and he was bleeding. So it wasn't safe at all, I think.
And like the everyday life, did you have electricity? Did you have water? Did you have was food affordable? Like, what were some of the repercussions of living in a war zone?
Yeah, electricity was not provided regularly, and we didn't have water supply for very very prolonged periods. I remember one time we didn't have water supply for 63 days, and I used to bring water from other neighborhoods and from wells because there were wells. They were working it, and I used to wake up from 5 a.m. morning to just bring water, 200 liters of water per day. This was about water supply. Food was affordable, but in a period, again, I remember that Aleppo was, how should I say? I forget the word. Yeah, Aleppo, the western side of Aleppo was surrounded by rebels, and food was not affordable. It was just one period. After that, everything was reachable. So food was not a big deal, but water supply was really very hard to reach. People who had people who had patients in their houses, it was a big problem for them because they have to wash, they have to.
And what was the aid like? Was there any aid from organizations?
Yeah, many organizations were working, beginning from Red Crescent and Jesuits organization. I don't want to name them because I'm going to forget some others. So many organizations were helping. Yes.
And was there a sense of community amongst just everybody, or maybe just the Armenian community, or maybe just the Christian Arabs? Like, was there a sense of community within the city?
Yeah, I think all organizations were providing help, aid, beginning from Armenians, and there was a good sense of collaboration between Arabs and Armenians in that period, and because from churches they used to supply water for Muslims, and from mosques you would go and take aids like foods or food supply or maybe blankets for during winter time from mosques, or so there was a very interesting collaboration between different communities. But again, Armenians were providing help just for Armenians because our because our resources are restricted. So.
What do you think was the most challenging moment for you and your family within the 5 years that you were still in Syria?
The most challenging period?
Or the most challenging experience?
The most challenging experience was the one I talked about, the incident. And in 2012, my sister was having an exam, and their university was bombarded. So that was also a challenging incident. And 200 students were died in that at that day. Again, in the same period of that, in 2012, they called to our landline, and I just went to school in the morning, and they called that we have kidnapped your son, but it was a joke, but this experience is very challenging for us, and till now my mom remembers sometimes, and remembers how hard it was to just make sure I wasn't kidnapped, because they said the person who was calling said that if you don't bring 5 million Syrian pounds, which equals maybe $80,000 next morning in this certain place, within 1 hour we will send your son's head and fingers, and after 2 hours we're going to send cut his head and send it to you. So, but after half an hour or so, they called and said it was a joke, and they said it in Armenian words. So we don't know, but at that time electricity was gone, so it was cut off. So we didn't know who was calling us. Yeah.
You were mentioning kidnapping, and I guess it was a joke, but who, if you know, who was targeted most often? The wealthy, or the Christians, or how did they choose their targets? Do you know?
Well, first of all,
they started. Know people who were kidnapped?
Yeah. First of all, they started from wealthy people, and it was always, not always, but in most of the times, it was their workers who witnessed their wealth for their whole life. So they told others that they are wealthy, and they started to kidnap wealthy people. First of all, the target was wealthy people, and then when after.
Sorry. And they, who is the they that's kidnapped?
They, I don't know, casual people. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's a rebel or a government or a regular civilian.
Yeah, maybe regular civilian, even regular civilians. After a period, rebels were, even though rebels had a free Syrian army, but after that, a lot of different groups and different small segregated armies were formed, and those little groups were kidnapping people. So you never know who is kidnapping others, but about seeking information. Seeking information about wealthy people was always done by the same workers of the same. How should I say? The workers in the same building.
They knew each other.
Yeah, they knew each other.
So sorry, I cut you off. You were saying first it was the wealthy, and
first it was the wealthy people, and then I guess in 2014, where when this ISIS formed, even before that, Jabhat al-Nusra and those very terrorist groups, those started to kidnap Christians, and sometimes there was discrimination against Armenians itself, and we always link that to them being trained by Turks, so we don't know what's the source for that. But also, not Azeris, but what was that community? Minority of
Yazidis.
Kurds? Yeah, Yazidis. Yazidis were also targeted by ISIS. So, yeah, first of all, it was wealthy people, and then they started to target different minorities.
So then, I guess you were saying that you left Aleppo in 2015.
Yes.
After your house was bombed on April 26th.
Yeah.
So you stayed for 3 months with relatives and then you left Aleppo. So how did you, how many of your friends had left already at this point?
You mean in 2015?
Yeah, by the time that you left, how many of your friends had already left?
The majority of them, actually. One left in 2013. The other one again 2014. So gradually we were all leaving. So by the time I left Syria, the majority of my friends had left previously.
And how did you leave with your family? Did you go by bus, by plane?
Yeah, by bus. We traveled from Aleppo to Beirut by bus. It took maybe 12 hours or more, and then we stayed for 4 years in Beirut because we have relatives there. My aunt lives there, and then in 25th of July we traveled and came to Armenia.
And did you face any obstacles on the road from Syria to Lebanon?
Yes. First of all, our bus launched at 3 a.m. It was very dark everywhere. So when we reached to a place which is very risky place, because one side was dominated by ISIS, the other one was by I guess Jabhat al-Nusra. So it was very risky place, and suddenly the road was closed, and people we didn't recognize them, whether they were Syrian soldiers or they were just casual people, but putting the clothes of soldiers on them. So they came from the mountain and said that, claimed that there are bombs in front of you, and you have to pay us in order to fix them, and so we stayed there for an hour, but after that, two soldiers from them, with their guns, were with us, and they were claiming that they are fixing the bombs, but it was very challenging moments that two strange people with guns are with us, and we have all the goals and the wealth that we still had. So it was very challenging and scary moment. That was the only obstacle.
And then how did that end? After an hour?
Yeah, after an hour we paid them, but less than what they demanded. And because if we had paid them more or what they demanded initially, we would have to pay for others as well during our along our way to Beirut. So.
Were you the only family on the bus?
Yeah, two. Actually, there were two families: our family and another family.
And the other family also paid?
Yeah.
And these two soldiers, do you know which group they were part of?
We didn't know. Yeah, but they weren't from Syrian Arab army.
And so once you arrived in Lebanon, you stayed with your family, and then you came to Armenia.
Yes.
And how did you know what to do once you got to Armenia? Did any organization help you find a house or among your first week or two here?
Well, my uncle lives here since he came here since 2012. So we lived in their house for 1 week or so or more, and he had rented a house for us beforehand, but we were waiting for other other people to leave the house, and then we went there and settled there. So there was no problem, and then we came to first. My mother started to volunteer in Aleppo NGO, and then I volunteered. I participated in many programs, and before leaving Syria, I asked all the details about transferring to the university. So everything was decided, I would say, beforehand.
And you mentioned you had a sister. Is she older or younger than you?
Yeah, she's older than me, 5 years.
And so, was she also working on figuring out logistics for moving you, or was she going to live abroad?
No, she went abroad before us, before the incident of our house. So she went to Turkey to work there for a year and a half, and then she was there, and she always visits us every 6 months or every year, once in every year.
And how easy or difficult was it for your parents to find work here?
Well, my father started to work from the day we arrived here, but it wasn't like he grew in his work in Armenia very gradually. Like he's an engineer, and he used to invent and plan different new plans in electrical field. But when he came here, he started from the basics till he had some he made friends here, and now he works, but it's not very satisfactory.
Why?
The income is not very satisfactory.
And I think earlier before the interview we were talking about work ethic.
Yes.
Not necessarily here in Armenia, but I'm wondering, do you notice a difference at all in work ethics between those here and your Armenian community back in Syria?
Since Armenia is a post-Soviet country, the people are used to work in the status of employee, and like if you give people some tasks, they can do it. But in Syria, it's just the contrary, because people used to be craftsmen, and and each and every family or a person had his own shop, and he had his own decisions being made by him. So it's very different. The work ethics are very different, since the work status was different. So what else should I talk about?
Well, you mentioned also that in Syria you used to go to church on Sundays, and I'm wondering if you notice any difference between religious activities here.
I'm not very much interested in religious activities here, so.
What do you think was the biggest challenge for you and your family in coming to Armenia?
I don't know, getting integrated. That's the biggest challenge, I think. The first one who was easily integrated was me, because I went to school and I met new people from day one. So it was very easy for me, and it was. I should mention that it was our third visit to Armenia, so we were more or less familiar to the community. So and my father started to work as well. And he made friends. But the most difficult part was from my mother's side because um, she's a volunteer in Aleppo NGO, which is a community of Syrian Armenians, and she doesn't have much new friends from local Armenian community. So I think from viewpoint of from integration point of view, the most one who struggled is my mom, and I don't find any other challenge except for uh, the income, which is not proportional to expenditure. So
And you're studying now at the medical school.
yes.
And do you hope to practice medicine here in Armenia?
I hope to specialize and and go through residency program in abroad, but then I hope to come back and work in Armenia.
So I have a question because you said that you've spoken a lot or worked a lot on topics of identity, of
Yeah.
Syrian differences, of Syrian Armenians here in Armenia. And I want to know, in your opinion, what's the difference between the Armenian community in Syria when you were living in Syria and that same community now living here?
Oh.
You were mentioning that in Syria you worked very hard to preserve the Armenian identity. Yeah. And now, in a sense, maybe because everyone is Armenian, or almost everyone is Armenian, you might not need to do that, but in a different way you might. And so I'm going to stop making my question so convoluted, but I'm just going to ask you, what's the difference between the Armenian community in Syria and that same community here now?
Oh, the whole community has changed, I think, because first of all, it's diluted diluted more. It's not wholly entirely diluted, but it's diluted more than it was in Syria. Some people became more closed-minded, more stuck to the traditions and stereotypes, and other people became more open-minded and made friends and integrated more. So, and those people who are either getting stuck or being more open-minded are at the same time part of the community that you're mentioning, the Syrian community here in Armenia. So this little change affects on the whole community. So I guess we're not gathering under one roof here. This is a very big difference. Some people started to some people are very stubborn and don't want to learn Eastern Armenian. Others forget Western Armenian and said that the only way to integrate is just to speak Eastern Armenian because it's the language of Armenia. So this is also a very important difference between Syrian Armenians in Syria and here. And languages no longer are how should I say? Unifying factor, I think. Because the new generation who is learning in schools is more comfortable in Eastern Armenian than Western Armenian, especially children who are growing up here. So, and they are here for 6 years. So they are more comfortable in Eastern Armenian, and this is a very big problem in my opinion. Language is no more unifying us. This also affects on the Syrian communities in Armenia, because in Syria one of the most important factors was not only the ethnicity but also the language was a unifying factor. So language and religion. Language more, because there are Christians in Syria. So it can't be the only factor religion can't be the only factor that unifies us. But here, since religion is the same, language is more or less the same, so it's not that we are still a community here. I think we are just starting to disperse throughout Yerevan and have friends. And I think every Syrian Armenian, at least in youth population, has local friends, and this is a very good improvement.
But so what, if anything, do you think is a unifying factor? Is there one here for the Syrian Armenians who live here?
Unifying factor? Misfortune. I don't think there is anything else. As I mentioned, everything is changed. Even mentality. Sometimes when I meet Syrian Armenians and we start to discuss about politics, especially in politics, we find very much diversity, and sometimes the different points of view create conflicts, and we didn't have that conflicts, that kind of conflicts, because we weren't aware of political human rights in Syria. So,
do you think that there's anything in particular or specific about the Syrian Armenian community that everyone should really work hard to preserve here in Armenia?
Just the language, Western Armenian language, and it doesn't belong only to Syrian Armenians. All Armenians from, who left Western Armenia. Just that. We don't need to preserve us from other people in Armenia. I don't think so, because it's no longer called repatriation. If it's not so.
What? It's no longer called repatriation.
If you don't integrate, and if we have to preserve something, then it's no longer called. We can't call it repatriation anymore. Because repatriation is returning to roots, regardless of the people living in Armenia. So you don't have to select people and integrate to some part of them, and do not refuse to integrate in the other part. So I think this mentality should be changed, but the only thing that should be preserved is the Western Armenian language.
And so, I guess, is there anything else that you wanted to say about living in Armenia and what it's like to be living here?
No, just be more transparent. That's it. I would say this advice, or this piece of advice, is to Syrian Armenians who are living here: just be more transparent and more open to your deep emotions and deep thoughts about Armenia, and do not be restricted by other people's opinions about living in Armenia. And that's it, because people want to see the world through their eyeglasses. So, and being open is a very important factor, because parachutes.
You were saying that Syrian Armenians should be transparent?
Yeah, Syrian Armenians should be transparent to their deep feelings and to their deep thoughts, and do not. They should seek for help and ask other Syrians, but to not be restricted by their opinions, because we should be open, and parachutes don't work unless they're open. So that's it.
Do you think that it's a problem or it's challenging for Syrian Armenians to open up and to...
Yeah, because we used to be isolated. We used to be part of an isolated community in Syria. So, and we are still isolated people in here. So it's a challenge for us.
Sorry, I have another question before the last one.
Yeah.
But how can you describe the difference of what it is to live at first in a country with so much diversity in terms of ethnicity and religion, and now in a country with such little diversity in terms of ethnicity and religion? In your opinion, how is that? How do you feel that difference? And if so, what is it like?
Well, yeah, I feel the difference because I no longer deal with other people like Muslims, for example. Even though I have Muslim friends from the university, because it's a there is a diverse community there. But also within Armenians, we have a big example of diversity because there are repatriates from Iran, from Iraq, from the US, from Europe. I have friends from Europe, Armenians. So it is a different example of diversity. So right now I'm experiencing a diversity which is different in its way from the one which was in Syria. It was, I guess, it was forced diversity by religion, by ethnicity. But here, those points are not different, but our backgrounds are different. So.
Thank you. And so, if you want to mention anything else about identity, please feel free to. No, okay. So I wanted to ask you, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
In the next 5 years, I see myself in a residency program, I guess, specializing in maybe neurosurgery, because that's my dream. If not, maybe general surgery. I haven't decided yet. But yeah, that's myself. The country you mean? Maybe abroad, but planning to return back to Armenia, and that's it.
And
I can't tell you about my personality because I don't plan to become something.
And just because you've spoken a lot about the Syrian Armenian community in general, and you've made some generalizations, I'd like to know your opinion on what do you think, or what do you hope the Syrian community in Armenia will be like in 5 years?
More organized, in the sense of preserving the language, because it's not a good situation to mix up the language, two languages, two dialects with each other, and create another dialect which is not understandable by either one, sorry. And I hope we become more organized, and I hope we have schools that teach in Western Armenian, not only the language, but the subjects as well. The whole curriculum should be in Western Armenian, because it's not. I remember our teacher telling us that you don't have to just speak Western Armenian. You have to describe Garni, the temple of Garni, in Western Armenian. So this is what I see us in 5 years.
Would a teacher here told you that, or in Syria?
No, here. She's a Syrian Armenian, lives here. Zephyr Republican.
So I was going to ask you how you think that you keep saying preserve the Western Armenian here in Armenia, and I'm wondering how you thought to do that. So one is with schools and curriculums in Western Armenian, and then another is probably with publications in Western Armenian.
Publications, yeah.
What else do you think?
Just live the moment in Western Armenia. Practice the language.
And then one last thing that you mentioned before, you had a really beautiful quote about dualism and how every Armenian lives with this dualism.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering here, what do you feel? Do you feel
what dualism
do you feel
do I
more
experience?
than I don't know what the word for 3 would be.
Oh, okay.
Child is another word, but
no. Yeah, since it's more than 2, you should erase all of them. I think. No, I don't live dualism here. Because sometimes when maybe it's because of my personality, because I'm always approached by as if I'm still a Syrian Armenian who speaks Arabic and speaks and is different from others. But I don't consider this as any form of dualism. I don't think if it's clear what I said. No, I don't think I live in dualism in Armenia. Just that when sometimes I speak Eastern Armenian for a very long time. I hope for the minute that when I meet my friend and I start to speak in Western Armenian. This is the only form of dualism that I live, and I see, or I hope to see us in 5 years speaking just Western Armenian with all Armenians. Because the only barrier that we have is that local Armenians are not very fluent, or they don't even understand the language very much, Western. So we're forced to change it. And one of my dreams is just to not switch to any kind of dialect, just to speak pure Western Armenian and communicate with it. That's.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
Is there anything else that you want to add that you haven't said?
I think I talked about everything.